Okay.
It said the meeting's in recording.
Okay. So Dee, you should now be the host.
I see it.
You see that? And it looks like the recording is still on. So we'll see if that makes a difference. So again, good morning, everyone. Good to see you all and be with you today. We are going to continue our study of the prophets. So last week we did the prophet Jonah, which was a kind of fun book and was probably the easiest of the prophets to do. Today we're going to wade into Micah, which, as you will see, is much more difficult than Jonah, and we'll see how that goes. Okay, so at the end of this, even if we're not done the book of Micah, if y'all hated it, then we don't have to finish a book just because we started it. Okay. So do you still see me? I just got a message that there was a connection problem.
I see you.
Okay.
Father Rich, I have a connection problem. I was getting two screens with you, and the voice was overlaying the other voice. It was like double I was hearing. So I tried to delete one of them. That's what I was doing. So I'm going to see if that's any different.
Okay. All right. Okay. As long as it's working. So anyway, so we're going to start the book of Jonah, and of Micah, and we'll see how that goes. All right. So let's, as with all the prophets, we have to know what the situation is. So it's the context in which they are operating. So y'all should see a map. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. So Micah did his prophecy anywhere from 742 BC to 687 BC. So we're talking sort of the second half of the 8th century before Christ, up to the very beginning of the 7th century before Christ. Now, the reason it's such a long period of time is that the book itself tells us that he was prophesying during the reign of 3 kings, and so we know the dates when those kings were reigning, but we don't know exactly when Micah was offering his prophecies. So we know it has to be sometime during the reign of those 3 kings. The other thing that you need to know about prophets is that the book that we have, the writings that we have, we're not sure that the prophet actually wrote them. We're confident that the prophecies, the sayings, are from the prophet, but they may have been recorded by a disciple. And which means that the actual book could have been written, a couple hundred years later than when the prophet actually prophesied. And we know that, for example, the book of Isaiah is like that, because when you imagine the span of years that the prophet is talking about, it's over 100 years. So clearly the prophet isn't writing all of this stuff down. That later disciples are probably writing it down. So it's the same thing with Micah. So we know when Micah lived and when he was prophesying, but we really don't know when the book was written. And they actually suspect that the book is written much later here because there are references to events that would not have happened during Micah's lifetime. So they think that that's the author adding sort of those references in, and not necessarily what Micah himself would have said. So that's always going to be an issue when you're dealing with the prophets. There's a difference between when the prophet is prophesying, and there's a difference when the book is actually being written down. So it could be years later that the book is written down, and his prophecies would have then probably been, circulated by word of mouth, or bits and pieces were written down, and then finally later a disciple gathered them all together and wrote them back and collected them into one book. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the first thing as a background. Now, in terms of that period of history when Micah was prophesying, you'll see this map generally sets that out. And it's important to understand so that when we get to his prophecies, we'll know what he's talking about. So at this time in history, the nation of Israel has already split into two parts. The southern part is known as Judah. Okay, that's the orange part. And the capital of Judah is Jerusalem. Okay, and that's important to know because really Micah doesn't ever really refer to Judah. He just talks about Jerusalem. But he's really talking about all of Judah. He's just using Jerusalem as shorthand to talk about all of Judah. Likewise, the northern part of the kingdom, this is the pink part, which is known as Israel. The capital of Israel is Samaria. So you'll see Samaria right there. And again, in his prophecies, Micah will address a prophecy to Samaria, but he's really talking about the entire northern kingdom of Israel. Okay, so that's the first thing, is the kingdom has split. The southern kingdom is Judah, and Jerusalem is its capital. The northern kingdom is called Israel, and Samaria is its capital. Okay, any questions about that before we go further?
Yeah, is it still the same today?
No, today Israel is a united nation, and it doesn't necessarily follow the same geographic boundaries that we're looking at right now. So the state of Israel today is bounded on its eastern border by the Jordan River, which is the river that runs between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. And on this side, on the right side, as you're looking at it, so on the east side of the Jordan, that would be modern-day Jordan today.
Okay.
On the west side is Israel, but even Israel hasn't annexed all of that. So you've heard about the West Bank. The West Bank refers to territory that's on the west bank of the Jordan. So it's sort of the area where my cursor is going. And Israel controls that territory, but it has not actually annexed it to make it part of the nation of Israel. And the reason it hasn't done that is that if it annexes it, all of the people living in that territory will become citizens of Israel. And the vast majority of the people who live in that territory are Palestinians. And if Israel annexes that part and makes the Palestinians citizens of Israel, then when you look at all of the nation, the non-Jews will outnumber the Jews. And then the fear is then Israel will no longer be a Jewish nation. So that's all part of the, all of the things that complicate the Middle East.
Okay.
It's not an easy situation. But today, Israel is pretty much all what you're seeing my cursor going by. So it's the pink part and the orange part, if that's orange. It just does not include this side of
Jordan.
of the Jordan River. That is the nation of Jordan, and down here you've got Saudi Arabia and that kind of stuff. Okay. All right. Any other questions about the geography? All right. So then, one other thing we want to add to is where is Micah? Does Micah live, and where is he from, and where is he prophesying? So we know from the book that he comes from this little area called Moresheth Gath. So you see where my cursor is? It's southwest of Jerusalem. So why is that important? Well, it's important because Micah is not native of Jerusalem. Okay, he's not a city dweller. He comes from one of the small towns, and he's going to travel up to Jerusalem, and he's going to make his prophecies in Jerusalem. So what do you think? How do you think that the people in Jerusalem, how do you think they're going to take kindly to this guy from the burbs coming up into their city?
They're not.
Very kindly.
Yeah, they're not going to see Micah as one of them.
Nope.
And so there's going to be some hostility between the Jerusalemites and Micah. So that's the only other thing to before we actually get into the prophecies, to realize that Micah is making his prophecies in Jerusalem, but he is not a native of Jerusalem. He's Jewish, and so are the listeners in Jerusalem. They're all Jewish. They're all from Judah, but he's not from Jerusalem. Okay, so it would be like if somebody from Oakland traveled to Baltimore and started criticizing Baltimore. How do you think that's going to go over?
Well, it doesn't go over well now.
Well.
Yeah.
Not well.
They're going to tell him to go back from where he came from, right?
Right.
Go back to Oakland, worry about what's happening in Oakland. We'll take care of ourselves here in Baltimore. It's
Well,
that
we have a
type.
problem with the telling us what to do.
What's that?
I said, we have a problem with the Annapolis telling us what to do.
All right, so that's the geography. Let me see if I can figure out how to get back to the book now. All right, so let's look at the book of Micah. Did everybody find it in their Bibles?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is that Micah is probably preaching and prophesying at the same time that Isaiah is preaching and prophesying. And Isaiah preaches and prophesies in Jerusalem as well. And you'll see at one point, we'll see when you recognize, if you recognize it, you should. There's going to be passages in Micah that sound like they're from Isaiah. And in fact, some of them are word for word from Isaiah. And so that sets up the question, was that Micah's prophecy and Isaiah stole it from Micah? Isaiah's prophecy and Micah stole it from Isaiah? Or was there a third prophecy that both Micah and Isaiah had access to, and they were both stealing it from somebody else?
Oh, I didn't think about that.
So those are the kind of the interesting things, and you'll see when we get to that part. You might not know it's Isaiah, but you're going to say, "Man, this sounds awfully familiar," and it's because it's from the prophet Isaiah. So we don't know exactly whose prophecies it actually is, because we know Micah and Isaiah are prophesying around the same time. They could have even known each other, but so that's one reason why there may be some overlap in their prophecies.
Okay. Well, what's interesting is that I always thought that God called one prophecy, these prophets one at a time through the centuries. Not this first time I heard of two of them at the same time. But mostly you read about only one moving on, between that time, but two, I'm surprised.
Yeah. No, I mean, there are, we have evidence that there are other times when that has happened. I mean, the reason we get that impression is when we read that prophet, he only tells the story from his point of view. So he's not telling you about others who may be doing similar things. There's also a possibility that, these prophets are active and then they may not be active and then they reactivate and then they're, not active. So it's possible, for example, Isaiah's active and then he kind of takes a break and Micah comes in and he's active. And then Micah takes a break and Isaiah comes back in. So we just know they lived and they prophesied around the same time, but we don't know exactly when the prophecies are being made. So we don't know whether they're doing it simultaneously. They might be kind of going back and forth between themselves. Remember, our data isn't that accurate. But those are interesting things to know. And again, we don't know if what we're reading is what the prophet wrote down or if his disciples wrote it down much later. And so in Micah, for example, I'll show you when we get there, he prophesies things about the northern kingdom that happened after he died, but are pretty accurate, which leads people to believe that maybe somebody edited it to make it look that way, so that could have been edited by a disciple of his. And as we know from the New Testament, a lot of what we're reading isn't written by the author, it's written by a disciple. That's just the way they did things back then. They're not like we are today. If somebody did that, we would call somebody a ghostwriter, or if they didn't own up to it, we would call them a plagiarist. So, all right, so let's just jump right in. Who would like to begin reading chapter 1, verse 1?
I'll read.
All right.
Chapter 1. The word of the Lord, which came to Micah of Moseth in the days of
Jotham,
Azar, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, which he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem.
Okay, so that one sentence just summarizes everything that I just went over with you. You see it right there? Micah is from Moresheth. He's prophesying in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, who were the three kings, one after the other in Judah. And he's going to prophesy about Samaria, which is the northern kingdom, and Jerusalem, which is the southern kingdom. Okay, let's go.
Oracles of punishment. Hear, O peoples, all of you. Give heed, O earth, and all that is in it, that the Lord God do witnesses against you, and the Lord from his holy temple. For see, the Lord goes out from his place, and descending, treads among the heights of the earth. The mountains melt under him, and the valleys split open, like wax before a fire, like water poured down a slope. All this is for the crime of Jacob, for the sins of the house of Israel. What is the crime of Jacob? Is it not Samaria? And what is the sin of the house of Judah? Is it not Jerusalem?
All right, let's stop there for a minute. Just because, one of the things, as you know, is the prophets write in very poetic language, so it's not always obvious what they're saying. So how would you, Dee, you could do it if you want, or if anybody else, how would you summarize what he's saying just in this piece?
Well, to me, it looks like God is watching us, and it looks like we're not taking care of each other. There's something going on. There must be some kind of tension going on between Samaria and Judah. To me, Jerusalem and Jesus, they are the capitals of each side. So it looks like that. Al, whose fault is it? Is it yours or is it theirs? So that's what I get out of it. God
is God happy with one over the other?
No, he's not happy with one over the other. No.
Yeah, so that's good. That's a good summary. So what you have to imagine, you have to be poetic. So when we go through this, you really have to use your imagination. So basically, he's giving the image of God lives in his temple, right?
Right.
And where is the temple located?
The temple is located on top of the mountain. It looks like
The mountain. Which mountain? Which city? Jerusalem. Okay, so it's like the idea that God lives in the temple in Jerusalem, and now he's going to go out from his place, and he's going to descend, not because he's coming from heaven, but because he's coming from the mountain on which Jerusalem sits.
right.
And he's now going to tread upon all the heights of the earth. And the mountains melt under him and the valleys split open because nothing can keep God back. He's able to go out and see whatever the heck he wants to see. And the reason he is going out is for the crime of Jacob. Jacob is shorthand for Israel. And then, what is the crime? Is it not Samaria? Which is, just the fact that there is a northern kingdom now, as opposed to a united kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, he's not just himself to the northern kingdom. He's also looking at the sin of the southern kingdom, which is Judah.
Right.
And that is, again, Jerusalem. Okay, so right now, God's not happy. He sees both the northern and the southern kingdoms, as being sinful, and he's now going to do something about it. So he's going to tell us a little bit more about some of the details. So let's continue on verse 6.
So I will make Samaria a ruin in the field, a place to plant vineyards. I will throw its stones into the valley, and they bear its foundation. All its carved figures shall be broken to pieces, and all its wages shall be burned in the fire, and all its idols I will destroy. As the wages of a prostitute, it gathers them, and to the wages of a prostitute they shall return.
Okay, so again, using your imaginations. What does it mean to turn Samaria into a place where they plant vineyards?
It sounds like God is angry and he's just going to destroy everything. He's going to get rid of because they've been sinful.
Right. So what does Samaria currently look like?
It looks like to me he's going to, the cities are going to be bare, and they're going to be back to doing what they had. It's going to be bare. It's going to be whole vineyards like a country, town or something.
Okay.
He's cleaning all that stuff away and taking them back to where they should be when the nation first started. Like when he became their God, they've strayed away from that. So he's trying to take them back.
Right. That's what I get.
I mean, again, the images, don't forget, Samaria is a city.
Right.
And
Right.
so the cities were surrounded by walls, and the homes were all made of, wood and stone and everything.
Right.
And you couldn't put a vineyard in the middle of the city. There wasn't any free land to do that.
Right.
So basically, what he's saying is, I'm going to level this city.
Right.
And it's going to be a level enough that if you wanted to plant vineyards, you could do it. Now, he's giving you an idea of why he is angry. Why is God angry? What does Samaria do wrong?
Mm.
Does it have anything to do with idols?
Yes, exactly. What does it mean? What is the reference to idols?
Because they're worshiping those idols.
Right,
Oh,
instead of God.
Yes,
Carved figures.
they're worshiping other gods and the God of Israel. Okay, and the reference here to the wages of a prostitute, they actually think that is a reference to the the temple prostitutes. I think we've mentioned in the past that in some of the pagan worlds, the gods of fertility were worshipped by you actually going in and having sex with a
Oh yeah.
prostitute. Okay, so that it's not just basic prostitution in a major city. It's most likely prostitution as a way of worshiping the fertility gods. Okay, so we know right now so far that God is angry at Samaria because it looks like they're worshiping other gods.
right.
Okay, any questions so far? Wait a minute. Okay.
For this I will lament and wail, though barefoot and naked. I will utter lamentation like the jackals, mourning like the ostriches. For her wound is incurable. It has come even to Judah. It has reached to the gate of my people, even to Jerusalem. Do not announce it in
You just want to stop right there for a minute because there's something really interesting going on here that you wouldn't necessarily pick up. I will lament and wail and go barefoot and naked. Who's going to do that? And why?
Oh, that's a good question. For I will. God's going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
If we prophesy to God,
I'm thinking God too. God, in other words, he's going to go to these lengths to make these people come back to where they should be.
What would going barefoot and naked do?
It's like you've stripped yourself down to nothing.
Okay, so it's going to be God as bare as God is, right? There's no.
Right. There's.
But what else?
That's it.
What else if you were in the city and someone went around barefoot and naked?
oh God.
It's going to get your attention, right?
Yes.
Right.
So
Oh yeah.
So what the scholars actually believe is that Micah himself stripped down and walked through Jerusalem barefoot and naked in making these prophecies.
Oh.
And
So
yeah,
was
it shows
God at the time.
vulnerability, and it's the unvarnished message, but it's also going to attract attention, right? I mean, if somebody started walking downtown Baltimore naked and barefoot and started preaching, people are going to stop and look at them. It gets your attention.
Right. Be all over the news. Right.
All right, let's keep going. You might have to mute who's on the phone there, Dee.
Sorry about that. I should have. I'm done.
Okay, go ahead. Verse 10.
Do not announce it in Garth. Do not weep at all. In Bethlehem, roll in the dust. Pass by. You will dwell in Cyprus. The inhabitants of Zion do not come forth from the city. There is lamentation in Bethel. It will withdraw its support from you. The inhabitants of Moab hope for good, but evil has come down from the Lord to the gate of Jerusalem. Harness thieves to the chariots, inhabitants of Elizabeth. You are, okay, where are you? You are the
Sorry.
beginning of sin. Okay, you moved it, now I'm lost. Okay. You are the beginning of sin for daughter Zion, for in you were found the crimes of Israel.
Okay,
Therefore,
let's stop right there for a minute.
That's a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah, okay, now you understand why the prophets are hard. Did you understand any of what Dee just read?
No. You gotta go back and look at what he said.
No.
Okay, now, so here's what's going on. All of these towns, Gath, Beth Lepra, Shapher, Zanan, Beth Azel, Marath, Lachish, these are all places in Judah.
Okay.
So it's all the southern kingdom.
Oh.
So it's interesting, if you go back, right, when he talked about the idols and the prostitutes, who was he talking about?
The idols and the prostitutes.
I mean, who was he accusing of worshiping the idols?
He was talking about the people in the north.
The people,
Right.
Samaria.
He was right. He was
in the north. Israel.
Right. He's accusing Israel, the northern kingdom, of idolatry, right?
Yes.
And then he says, he laments Samaria, for her wound is incurable.
Yeah.
And it has come even to Judah.
Oh, okay.
And then he names all of these places in Judah. And he concludes, let me see, wait a minute.
We got down to the
you are the beginning of sin for daughter Zion, Zion is a reference to Judah.
Okay.
For in you were found the crimes of Israel. Okay. So what is he saying about Judah?
So to me, all whatever Judah's doing, they're doing.
Whatever Samaria is doing, whatever Israel is doing.
Yeah, whatever Israel was doing, the people don't filter it down.
It's like it's filtered down.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like being on Facebook and seeing what everybody else is doing, and you start doing it too.
Right. Father Rich, I have a question. Wasn't it the Samaritans who originally started? Were they intermarrying with the Israelites, right?
No, that'll happen much later in history.
Okay, but it was the idolatry that started, that filtered down to Judah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point that Esther makes. We have to be careful. When we have Samaria, the Samaritans, and that kind of stuff, we hear it through the lens of Jesus, which is 700 years from now.
Gotcha.
Okay, and Samaria is a different place 700 years from now.
Okay.
So the reason Jesus was angry with Samaria is not the same reason that Micah is angry with Samaria. Okay. So just to summarize, remember what Micah is doing. Micah is from the south, right?
Right.
He's coming into Jerusalem, and he starts this prophecy that God is angry as all can be of the northern kingdom, right? Because they're worshiping other gods. So you're in Jerusalem and you're hearing this. What are you thinking?
This man is
And
crazy.
you don't know what you're talking about.
No. If you're in the southern kingdom and this prophet is criticizing the northern kingdom, what are you saying?
Well, you're saying that the northern
You're not talking about me.
Right, you're not talking about
Talking
me.
about me.
You ain't talking about me, you're talking about them.
Right.
Okay.
You go, guy. That's right. They're a whole bunch of idolaters. You do it, boy. You're doing just the. And then what does he do?
And then he tells them that it's coming down to you two.
It's them too.
You know better.
You're in the same boat.
Right.
Okay? So
So it's like, what are you laughing at? It's like, what are you laughing at? You're going to say
You just as bad.
yeah, don't get on your high horse just because I'm criticizing the North. You're just as bad. Okay?
we get it. We get it.
And you're just as bad because the crimes of Israel are found in you.
Mhm.
Okay?
Right.
Just finish off the chapter, D. Verse 14. Finish up the chapter.
For you must give back the dowry of Moses, the house of Akjab, are a dry steam bed to the kings of Israel. Again, I will bring the conqueror to you, inhabitants of Mashad. The glory of Israel shall come even to Adullam. Make yourselves bald, cut off your hair for the children who cherish. Make yourself bald as a vulture, for they are shaking you from they're taking. Wait a minute, for they are taken from you in exile.
Into exile.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bald as a vulture, for they are taking
So
from.
basically, he's telling Judah that all the bad things from Israel are coming down upon you. And so you yourself what do you think cutting off your hair for the children whom you cherish, what do you think that is?
Go into mourning.
Yeah, it's a call to repentance.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, when you made a vow, you would cut your hair. Remember how Paul did that? And then the last sentence is one of these things where they think maybe this got edited in. Make yourself bald as a vulture, for they are taken from you into exile. They are the northern kingdom being taken from you into exile. That doesn't happen for quite some time. So they think that might have been edited into. Because it doesn't happen during Micah's lifetime. Now it could be a prophecy, that he knows that God's given him, and he doesn't quite, he's not going to live to see it. But it's kind of a vague reference.
Right.
Okay.
And that's when Assyria took over the northern kingdom, right?
Exactly. That's when the Assyrians come in and conquer the northern kingdom.
Right.
Okay. And they don't really exile the kingdom.
No.
They take over. It's the Babylonians. The Babylonians come in and take over Judah. They exile the Jerusalemites. So, okay. So, I'm getting feedback, Dee. I don't know if you can see where.
Okay, I'm looking. I see Esther and me on.
So it might be Esther that I'm getting feedback from.
I just knew.
Okay, see if that. Yeah, I think Esther must be feedback. That's okay. Just Esther, when you talk, unmute yourself and then mute yourself afterwards. All right, so that's chapter 1. So all we know is God has called Micah to go into Jerusalem. He's obviously angry at both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And right now, we know the anger is over idolatry. But we're going to find out that's more than that. Okay, so far so good. Any questions before we go to chapter 2?
No.
Okay, so
Somebody
who wants to
say
start
this.
chapter 2?
Can I be heard?
Yep. Oh, well, if you're talking right now, no, we can't hear you. Was that Gwen?
Who was that, Gwen? Let me
Yeah.
see if she's unmuted, so I don't know why we can't hear her.
Do you hear her?
No. Gwen, turn up your volume or something. You're unmuted, so I don't know why we can't hear you. I don't know.
I don't know. Well, unfortunately, maybe we have to go to somebody else until Gwen can figure out what's happening.
Okay, this is Esther. I'll do it.
Okay.
Okay.
Ah, you plotters of iniquity, who work out evil on your beds. In the morning light you carry it out, for it lies within your power. You covet fields and seize them, houses and take them. The owners of their houses, people of their inheritance. Therefore, thus says the Lord, look, I am planning against this family an evil from which you cannot free your neck, nor shall you walk with head held high, for it will be an evil time. On that day you shall be mocked, and there will be bitter lament. Our ruin is complete. Our fields are divided among our captors. The fields of my people are measured out, and no one can get them back. Thus you shall have no one in the assembly of the Lord to allot to you a share of land.
Okay, let's stop there. All right, now we're getting a little bit more information of why else God is mad. Did you figure that out? It's in the top part.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is your sense? What do you think God is angry about here?
So, to me, it's like they are, in their thoughts while they're sort of sleeping, they're thinking about what they can do and, against other people. And then in the morning, they carry it out. They start doing all kinds of things to people. And they, like you said, and the rest of it kind of clear. They take people's property and they cheat, they start planning in their head how to cheat people. And they do it.
So is this a religious concern or is this an economic concern?
It's a social economic concern, it looks like to me.
Yes. Right. So apparently, the wealthy and I'm not sure personally whether this is addressed. I couldn't figure that out, whether this is addressed to Jerusalem or whether it's addressed to Samaria. But apparently the wealthy are feeding the non-wealthy, the poor. They're cheating them out of their own homes. They sit there at night trying to figure out how they're going to get more and more of their power. And they're not only cheating people out of their homes, but also out of their inheritance. Okay? And that is a reference to, if you remember, when the people settled the land of Canaan, each of the tribes were given land. And that became the inheritance of the people of that clan, of that tribe. And so what this is a reference to is that when you steal people's homes, you're not only stealing from them, but in essence, you're stealing from God, because God made them the inheritors of that land. And now you are cheating them even of their inheritance. See that? So God is offended for two reasons. He's offended because they're cheating one another, but in doing that, they're also disrupting what God's original intentions were, that each tribe would have its own land.
Right.
Okay? So now the complaint isn't just religious, it's also socioeconomic. All right. All right, Esther, you can continue. Unless anybody has a question, you can continue with verse 6.
Okay. Do not preach, they preach. No one should preach of these things. Shame will not overtake us. How can it be said, house of Jacob? Is the Lord short of patience? Are these the Lord's deeds? Do not my words promise good to the one who walks in justice? But you rise up against my people as an enemy. You have stripped off the garment from the peaceful, from those who go their way in confidence, as though it were spoils of war. The women of my people you drive out from their pleasant houses. From their children you take away forever the honor I gave them.
Okay, let's stop there. Okay, let's go back to verse 6. Who is saying, do not preach? No one should preach these things. Shame will not overtake us. Who is the they?
Well, you not preaching. Well, I guess the people of Samaria, I guess. The people of the north.
Well,
Israel.
there's who are they saying this to? Do not preach. No one should preach these things.
Micah himself.
They're addressing it to Micah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so where is Micah when he's making these prophecies?
Micah's in Jerusalem.
He's
Jerusalem. So they are the Jerusalemites, right?
Okay.
So he's quoting them, and obviously they don't like what he has to say.
Oh, okay. All right.
So they say basically stop preaching.
Yeah. Okay.
No one should preach these things. Shame will not overtake us. Right? How can it be said, house of Jacob, is the Lord short of patience? Are these the Lord's deeds? Do not, and then it goes on, he shifts now to my words, he takes on God again, the personage of God. And so his response is basically, well, how can I stop preaching when you're doing all of these things to God? You rise up against my people as an enemy. You've stripped off the garment from the peaceful. The women of my people you drive out. You drive them out from their homes. And from my children you take away the honor I gave them, which is, again, their inheritance. Mm-hmm. Okay? So here you're seeing that, and it's very typical in prophets, the people to whom he's prophesying are not happy. And they want him to shut up. Okay, so let's continue on verse 10.
Get up, leave. This is no place to rest. Because of uncleanness that destroys with terrible destruction. If one possessed of a lying spirit speak deceitfully, saying, I will preach to you wine and strong drink, that one would be the preacher for this people. I will gather you, Jacob, each and every one. I will assemble all the remnants of Israel. I will group them like a flock in the fold, like a herd in its pasture. The noise of the people will resound. The one who makes a breach goes up before them. They make a breach and pass through the gate. Their king shall go before them, the Lord at their head.
All right. See how this is kind of hard? Can anybody guess what's happening here? Don't feel bad if you can. Okay, so what's happening is they object again. They tell him, get the hell out, right? Yeah. And then he responds again as though he's of God. And he's saying, well, I got to preach. I can't not preach. But now I'm going to give you a different message. I will gather you. each and every one, and I will assemble all the remnant of Israel. And I will group them like a flock in the fold, like a herd in its pastures. Now, what's that sound like right now?
Sheep,
Like a shepherd.
Yeah, like a shepherd.
Like a shepherd, okay? It's exactly right. It's a shepherd image. So I'm going to gather you all together, right?
Right.
And now that could be right now until you go farther. That could be good or bad, right? He might be gathering them all together to punish them, or he might be gathering them together to save them.
To save them.
So
it looks like more to save them. It looks like more to save them to me.
right,
To save them.
that becomes clearer with verse 13. So the makes the breach goes up before them. They make a breach and pass through the gate. Their king shall go through before them, and the Lord at their head. So what he's gathering them together so that he can lead them once more, but a new king.
Right.
Okay, a shepherd king.
Right.
Okay, so let's go ahead.
Okay, I want to say that as we go through this, I get a little more understanding because in verse 10, I thought it's like he's still talking to he's still talking to the people, and I didn't get at first that this is the people telling him to get out. So he's talking, the people's talking, and then he's talking for God. All this in this thing here. So you have to stop. You can't read it all like he's the only one talking. It's like everybody's talking in this whole thing.
It's like a dialogue.
Yeah. So actually, the editors give you a cue with the quotation marks. So when you see something in quotes, that's not Micah.
Okay.
Okay. That's somebody else speaking.
Okay.
Where it becomes hard is you can't always tell whether it's Micah or whether it's God, because Micah speaks on behalf of God.
Right.
So you kind of have to then listen to what he's saying. So when he says, I will gather you, each and every one, and I will assemble all the remnant of Israel, do you think Micah is saying, I'm going to assemble you together, or do you think God is saying that?
I think God is saying that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty clear that God is saying that. Who the heck would Micah be to say he's going to come in and gather all of the remnant of Israel and group them together like a flock and lead them like a king, right?
Right.
So God is saying all of this, but it's you have to realize it's Micah who's speaking it.
Right.
He speaks on behalf of God. Okay.
It's sort of like a Messianic prophecy.
All right. Okay, good. And I'm just going to move to that. There are two things that are very important here that set that up as this as a Messianic prophecy. Okay. The first one is just the king. Okay. The idea that another king will arise from them is generally a messianic promise, because again, we have to make sure we don't interpret Messiah the way we know Messiah in Jesus Christ. Back then, a Messiah meant an anointed one. It meant somebody that God chose. And when God chooses the king, then that king is the Messiah. He's God's chosen one. He's the anointed one of God. Does that make sense to you?
Right.
So basically, God is saying, I'm going to raise up a king among you. And he's going to lead you, but I'm really going to be at the head. So this is a king who's going to be following me, unlike your current kings who are letting all these nasty things happen to you.
So this predates Saul and David. This predates Saul and David. They hadn't came about yet.
This is after Saul and David. So that's going to be another thing. That's going to tip you off. So right now, these kings, Ahaz and Hezekiah, God isn't happy with them as kings because they're allowing all of these awful things to go on.
Right.
So basically, what God is saying is, I'm really going to reassemble you. I'm going to take you away from these kings, and I'm going to give you another king who will go before you. Okay?
All right.
All right. And what was the image of this king?
Okay. He will be a shepherd.
As a shepherd.
Shepherd, okay? So who was a shepherd and a king?
That would have been Jesus to me.
Jesus.
No. Jesus is for another 700 years.
Or David was one.
Oh, David.
David was the shepherd. Remember, he had to be called out of the fields?
Yeah.
And then he was anointed king?
Yeah.
All right. So God is using this image of the shepherd king. What is he saying about this new king that's going to arise?
He's going to lead them back to where they came from. So he's going to lead them back to God. It's going to be a king like the original king, right. like David. Like David, yeah.
So this new king is going to kind of be from the house of David and be like David.
Yeah.
Okay? Because David was the first shepherd king.
Right.
And now this new king that I'm going to raise up will be another shepherd king.
And that won't be for another 700 years?
Well, we'll later interpret it that way. But right now, the promise is that I'm going to give you a king after the heart of David, basically. Okay? Which is good, right? Because David was a good king. David was the only king that really united Israel and kept them all together, because after Solomon came aboard, it all fell apart.
Yeah.
Okay, so the promise here is to raise up a king who will lead the people in the way that David led him.
Right.
And don't forget, the people would have known, what did God promise to David?
An inheritance.
That someone would come from his line, right?
Yeah, God made the promise to David that someone from his line will reign over Israel forever.
Right.
David was going to build God a house, and God said, no, you're not going to build me a house. I'm going to build you a house.
Right.
And your house will be your dynasty. So someone from your house will reign over Israel forever. So
that was after he sinned, he told him that.
What's that?
I said, he told him that after he had sinned, he told him that.
Mm-hmm.
Remember?
He told him that after he'd united Israel, and he wants to build God a temple.
Right, he did. He did.
So this prophecy here is a reminder to the people that God's going to fulfill the promise he made to David. You got it? Now, you see what I mean by how hard this stuff is?
Yes.
Yeah.
you got to know, you got to be like really familiar with all of this imagery, which the people back then would have been. But it's harder for us because it's not at the top of our minds. So God is telling the people, I'm going to regather you, and I'm going to really gather you and appoint for you a shepherd king, which is really meaning I'm going to fulfill my promise to David that a member of his house will reign over you. We will ultimately interpret this as Jesus, okay? But they're not there yet. All they hear is a prophecy to fulfill the promise God made to David.
Yes.
Okay? So does that make you understand, even in Jesus' time, why people weren't looking for Jesus to be the Messiah?
Right. Yes.
They're looking for the fulfillment of this promise.
Right.
Okay. Now there's one other thing I want to point out, and we'll call it quits for this, is because it's a very important term. The remnant of Israel. Does anybody want to take a stab at what that means, the remnant of Israel?
Would that be the people who were buried? The people have died, was buried, and the bones of their bones, like David, bones.
No, I was thinking about the people who actually went back to the way they were supposed to be from the beginning. Like whoever was left over was going to follow, um, God's laws would be the remnant of Israel.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit even more exacting than that. So the reference.
After the Babylonian exile,
Mhm.
you talk about that, the remnant of Israel after the Babylonian exile, those were the ones who were left.
This remnant is going to be referred to constantly by the prophets. That's why I want to spend some time with it.
Say what? Say it again.
All right, the reference to a remnant of Israel is mentioned probably by, I don't know if I can't say for sure by all the prophets, but by most of the prophets. All right, so it's a very important term to understand. And it means that within Israel right now, for as bad as everybody's behaving, there is a small group that is remaining faithful to God.
Oh, okay.
That's the same.
Okay? And so a remnant, remember, a remnant actually literally means that remains. Okay?
That's what I thought about the bones.
So there's this acknowledgement that there's always going to be a faithful few. Okay? That the faithfulness of Israel is never totally wiped out. That there will always be a faithful remnant, a group of people who are faithful to God, and it's from that remnant that God will rebuild Israel.
Oh, I got it. I got it. And that is why Israel is never destroyed, because there's always a remnant that saves them.
The people Israel, right, not the nation Israel.
Right.
Yes, people.
Yes.
That's why the people are not totally wiped out, because they always have a small group who always remain faithful throughout their history.
Yes. So that's an important idea to hold on to, is even as bad as God's people might get, it's never everyone. There's always a faithful few. And they are going to be the remnant of Israel upon which God will rebuild and renew and save Israel.
Oh, that's hopeful. That's really hopeful.
Okay, so that's exactly. So the first two chapters, most of it was what?
Most of them were telling them what they did and how upset God was.
Yeah. So yeah,
Right.
was it was, yeah, it was punishing, it was angry, it was accusatorial, most of it was like, just you guys are like really bad.
Right.
It ends with a bit of hope.
Hope and salvation.
Right.
That's what I hope.
Okay.
I feel hopeful.
Yeah, and we're going to see more of this, okay, as we go through the book. But one of the characteristics that is very important to understand about prophets is that actually most of their prophecies are railing and ranting against the people, right?
Right.
It's pointing out all the awful things that they're doing. But
Right.
it never is left like that. There's always a message of hope given. So there's sort of like a 3-part thing that you'll have to see. There's going to be the accusations, right? Well, there's kind of 4. There's the accusations, and then there's a judgment rendered against the people, and then there's punishment that is given to the people, but then there's going to be a message of hope.
Right.
Okay, so God will never completely abandon the people.
Right.
And what's very important is the message of hope. When you give somebody hope, are you talking about the past, or are you talking about the future?
The future.
You're talking about the future. You give them hope for the future. So if you have hope for the future, what does that do for you today? You have hope for tomorrow. What does that do for today?
Well, you got hope for the present.
Well, you're going to hang in there, right? You're going to hang on.
Yeah.
Because
you're gonna
tomorrow's going to be better.
Better, yes.
Okay.
Don't give up.
So one of the things that you have to learn about prophets is that they really aren't predicting the future. They're delivering a message of hope. And that message comes by way of what's going to happen in the future. Okay? But the main task of a prophet is to speak for God.
Right.
And most of that is to point out to how the people have failed and how they have to get their act together. And if they repent, then good will come to them. If they don't, then there will be punishment. But even in that, God will never abandon them. And there will always be hope for tomorrow.
Right.
And those are the messages that we typically read from the prophets. Okay, at Advent and Christmas, when you're reading all about Isaiah and everything, right, all those messages of hope, those are a very small part of Isaiah. Okay, Isaiah is Isaiah is 100 pages long. And if you gather all of his messages of hope, there are about 5 pages of it. Like 95 pages of it is everything people are doing wrong and what they have to do to get their act together.
Right.
Okay, and that's why the prophets are very hard, because we don't spend a lot of time reading those portions. We want to read all the messages of hope. So when we think of the prophets, we think we have good thoughts, right? Because Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, they promise us new life. They promise us a Messiah. But they're much more than that. So Micah is just a very small version. He's called one of the minor prophets just because it's short. He's only going to be 7 chapters long.
Right.
He does the same thing. It's going to be the same pattern. So if you want to continue with Micah, unless you think this is just too hard and you're not interested, you're going to see that pattern. There's this constant pattern of accusation and judgment and rendering of punishment and then a message of hope.
Well, Micah is a short chapter. It's only what, six chapters?
It's 7, I think, right?
Yeah.
7.
Yeah.
So, do you want to continue?
Yes.
I do.
Yeah, I find it really interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So then next week we'll start with chapter 3.
You know, I read Micah, and I feel like I'm getting more now because, like we said before, I'm thinking Micah is talking to God this whole time, and it's so it's confusing. But as we break it down, now I understand. We had a dialogue going on that I didn't know about. That I didn't pick up the first time that I read it.
Yeah.
So I want to go see more. I'm learning more.
Yeah, I would actually recommend that, since it's only 7 chapters, go back and read Micah again from beginning to end.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And now, what we just did with the first 2 chapters, and you kind of have that sense that, right, there are other people talking, there's Micah talking, there's God talking, there's accusations, there's punishments, there's messages of hope. See if you can start breaking that down a little bit. That's really how you have to read the prophets. The prophets you can only take in small bits at a time because they're hard.
Right.
And you really have to break it down and understand what they're doing. Okay? All right. I'm going to I think I can take the meeting back from you. And let's see if that, well, maybe I can't. You might have to give it back to me. Can you give it back?
Wait a minute. What am I supposed to be doing here?
So if you go if you click on me in your right hand and right click it, or can you just stop the recording? See, I can't do it anymore. I lost the recording.
Stop. I just stopped it.
Okay, then that's good.